Welcome to Transitions. I'm your host, Antoinette. Today we have some interesting guests for you to meet, and I hope that you'll be able to stay with us throughout the program. Now, I thought about this really famous song, love and marriage, go together like a horse and a carriage. And then I wondered whether or not this is really still the way it is. Do men, as they move from being bachelors to being husbands, is it still a really good fit, and is there still love in the midst of it? Well, we really would like to hear from some people today, and we have a new host today on Transitions, a new co-host, guest co-host, or editor, Tobias Oseki. So we are very pleased to have you, Tobias, and especially since today is Men on Marriage, having a bachelor around the group here will be really interesting. So
I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to learn some things and maybe walk away with some more knowledge. So I'm definitely happy to be here. We also have Trevor Smith, who's going to be here, and Joseph Glasgow, who are both going to be giving their stories about marriage and going through the experiences that they've had and sharing some of their stories. And then we're going to have Dr. David DeLay, who is also from the University of Winnipeg. He's an associate professor in the social work department, and he's going to share some information on men and intimate relationships. Right. And then we're going to have a little panel discussion, and we'll kind of discuss what we may have learned and hopefully go from there. Trevor?
Well, all I could say about marriage is that it's a beautiful opportunity, and it's a privilege that one gets the opportunity to have in life. And when you meet that person that you really want to be with, and you know you want to be with that person because you can feel it in your heart. When I first met my wife, which was about 10 years ago, we've been married for 2 years, I knew she was the one. I had that gut feeling in my heart that I had to meet her. And I was right. But you go through trials and errors, you go through various people until you meet the right person. And like I said, you can feel it in your heart. I've talked to my nephews, and a lot of times they ask me for advice on marriage and stuff like that, and I tell them I went through 4 years before I met my wife, and sometimes you have to wait. You don't never rush into things. You take your time, and that's how you know if you're going to be with that person. You can tell too by how she communicates with you, how she talks to you, it's just. And if I had a chance to have another big wedding, I would love to do that because I had a great wedding. Of course, I didn't even have to hire a band because all my friends are musicians, so we had a big jam. So it was really fun. It was a beautiful, magical night for me. I watched Titanic before I got married. I watched Titanic and I thought to myself, geez, I wish I could have a magical night like that, or a magical time in my life and it happened. It happened on my wedding day. And I'll never forget that. That was the biggest part of my life. And a lot of family, a lot of friends. I did in our church right downtown here. And then we had our big reception at Canadians Polo Park.
So you guys didn't have kids. So when you met your future wife, how long had you been dating or going out, or was there any kind of initial courtship?
Well, we've been going out for about 10 years. We were common law for 10 years. 10 years we've been common law, which is almost like being married, except you don't have the papers. But then we decided, well, if we're going to make this stick, then I want to do it right and have it done through the church, and then have our certificate of marriage. Yeah, so we've been together for 10 years and married 2 years. Yeah. And I just love my life. Each morning when I wake up, I always tell my wife, I just feel like I'm still in my honeymoon stage yet. I just feel like we were married yesterday. And I don't know what more I can say other than that. It's just that I'm just so happy when I get up and see service meeting.
Did you guys have kids at all? Have you guys?
Well, no. She had 2 sons, who's now my stepsons, naturally. And we're medical foster parents, so we also have foster children, little ones. So.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it very much, Trevor. Is there anything that you want to say?
Well, my story is a little bit different from Trevor's, in that my wife and I met in high school, and we remained friends throughout high school until we graduated. Following graduation, I left Trinidad and went to England to study. And we kept in touch with each other during that period of time. I could remember before I left, her dad had said to me, I told her dad, I'll be back in 3 years. He didn't know why I would have said that, but my intentions were to get married to his daughter. And we remained friends. We were corresponding with each other on a regular basis. But as you know, at that time, in the early 60s, we didn't have the kind of communication that we have now. You could Twitter now, and you have emails and these type of things. We had to use the phone, which was very expensive to call from Trinidad to England or from England to Trinidad. We used to write each other letters all the time, and these letters would take sometimes as long as a month to get to you. So it reached the point where we were writing automatically every 2 weeks so that we get a letter back. And this continued for the 3 years while I was in England. And at the end of 3 years, I did return to Trinidad to get engaged. And we got engaged, and we realized that the love was still there, the feeling for each other was still there. Her family were real supportive on both sides of the relationship. And I returned to England, but I didn't have a plan as to where do I go from here, And I followed about 3 weeks after I returned to England, I got an offer of a job. I applied for a job in Canada and got an offer, and decided to come out to Canada here, and ended up in a place called Portage la Prairie. While in Portage la Prairie, we had set a date for our wedding, and I returned home 6 months after my arrival here to get married. The difference between Trevor and I here is that when my wife returned to Canada, she lost contact, or she not lost contact, but the support that she had all these years with her parents and her sisters, she didn't have that. We didn't know very many people there. But we did meet one wonderful couple. And I told her I was going to call her name, and that is the Jameses, Norma and Randy James. And they sort of took us under their wings, and they sort of guided us. I could remember my wife, Norma, calling my wife into the room and saying, "Look, this is what you wear in winter time, this is what you wear in summertime." She didn't have a clue as to what Canada was all about. But these are the people that lend us a lot of support, and we give us advice, and it continued like that throughout our relationship with these family. And up to today, they are still very close friends of us. We seek advice from them. They give us advice. We were able to make good friends with a number of people who were there for us. There are some. After we left Portage to Brandon to attend college, we came back to Winnipeg. We did not have children during the first 3 years of our marriage. because I was one of those from the old school. Look, you have to, your parents used to say to you, before you start to have children, you have to have a house and you have to have a shelter. And this was stayed with me. So we bought a house when we left Brandon, and we had, a year later, we had our first child. And that was, again, another experience for my wife in terms of adjusting. She, again, we had met some friends in Winnipeg who were supportive of her again. So we always look at people for support, and we always got very good support from the people who we call our friends, who are still our friends up to today. Our marriage, as any other marriage, has its challenges, right? And no matter what, people will want to give you advice. Various people will give you different advice, different type of advice. I personally listen to all the advice people may give, but then I choose what is best for me. You see, we have had our differences, but we were able to work them out. Sometimes we reflect upon our past. We have a good communication system between us, and when we see that trigger, we know what triggers that sets each other off, and we sort of will try to avoid the situation. For example, one of the things I learned is you have to be very careful with the words that you use, what you say, because sometimes in anger, because these words, as I say, words is wind, but blows is unkind. But words that you say, sometimes you cannot take them back, or you wish you can take them back, but you cannot. And they could be just as painful as physically hurting someone. Okay. But we over the years have learned how to get around these things and avoid trying to hurt each other by words that we may say or by our actions. Our marriage.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you about the letters, because when you're speaking about the past, to me, that's a very romantic, and that's kind of how I picture all kind of love stories starting, is this exchange of letters. Do you still have the letters?
Well,
do you look back? Because you're saying that you look back to the past. Is that something that you use to rekindle and to?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, I have every letter that we had written to each other that I received from her. Right, and sometimes I will say to you, I still have those letters there, and we'll try to get one out and try to read that, and she will say, "Why don't you burn those things?" But it acts as a reminder, to what it used to be like. We were in love with each other at that point. But what we discover is, love alone is not what a marriage is all about. You have to be friends with that person. You have to be able to trust that person. And once you have that trust and that friendship and that communication, it makes for sort of a very good marriage. As I said, the challenges would be there, but you will know how to deal with those challenges when they come up. We agree to disagree on many. We agree to disagree on many things.
Yes.
But in general, I would say marriage is something that I will recommend to anyone. I'm from the old school.
There's
That's
nothing
great.
wrong with that.
That's great. Yeah. That's wonderful. And actually, when I looked at some art that was done by Danielle Friesen, and she contributed all the art to the set in this series, Series D. I really thought that maybe other people might have some different impressions of the art. Maybe can we, because you're talking about more to marriage than love and friendship and other things, but and the emotional side too, I see sort of like the contrasting emotions that can happen when you're in these intimate relationships. So maybe could you just rotate it just a little bit there, all the way around? And I'm interested in hearing from you, David.
Sure. So we were talking a little bit earlier before the show began about the work, and you were observing the different expressions on the faces of the sculpture. So, and that you made the connection between this being maybe representative of the different sort of mood states or feeling states that we may experience across our time, and that all of these states that we are in and that are temporary, they make up a little piece of who we are. So the sculptures for me represent, I like that analogy very much. They look at the complexity of man and see that we can see in that sort of reflections of ourselves.
And what about yourself, Trevor? What do you see anything there? What impressions do?
Yes, I actually am. Because a lot of times when you're married, or even common law, it doesn't matter whether you're common law or married, there's always going to be disagreements in your relationship. A relationship's not always a nice, smooth runway. So there's going to be some bumps. And what these are indicating to me is like one's not smiling and the other one is smiling. Yes, and there's a lot of ups and downs in marriages, of course. But I'll use my wife and I, for example. Sometimes we get into little tiffs here and there, and within 20 minutes we're laughing and joking with each other again. So we never let it go. And we never go to bed mad at each other, ever. It's always good night, honey, and a kiss on the cheek.
I think you're sounding like you're giving some advice to some of the future husbands there, eh? And,
because it's interesting because I noticed similar things, but like from me, what I see is exactly that: two people dealing with the same thing, that are looking at the sky, but getting a different emotion and getting a different response. Same problem, looking at it a different way, getting a different internal experience.
Interesting, yeah.
Because I think that's because we all see things differently, and perspective is literally just changing your viewpoint a little bit. And now you've got something new, and I think that's interesting that they're both facing away from each other and not even looking in the same direction. Is like, they could be standing back to back, and then that kind of whole. So to me, it's a binding, it's common, but at the same time it's separating. It's still, we're individual. And that's kind of how
What I see there in terms of the sculpture is not, the one is sort of smiling, the other one is smiling but not happy. And if you notice, for example, he's not happy, but he sort of has a little smile on his face. In a relationship or in a marriage, not every day will be the same. There are days when you'd find that you might come from work, or your wife might come from work, and they are just, because of an incident at work or not having a good day, they will be upset. And you might be, well, what's wrong? Why are you so crabby today? But then you have to understand that if there's a good relationship between the both of you, she will say, look, honey, this is the reason why I'm upset. So don't worry about me. In some cases, that could be the trigger for a big blow up. Depends upon how you deal with it. Come home, because if she's upset, she didn't make any supper for you. So instead of you making it for yourself, you say, why didn't you make supper? Where's my supper?
And so that's an interesting, and that's something I wanted to ask the people that are married, because I don't have that experience. Is there something that you found was the foundation before that relationship? Was there a friendship that led to, is there something that you go back to? Because there's going to be those times when that paper, you're looking at it and you want to burn it. What you know, is there something that you fall back to that is like, that's my...
In my case, we were friends, and we were very, very good friends. And I was not only a friend of hers, but a friend of the family. That's where I used to spend on my Saturday evenings, hanging with that family, getting to know them. We knew each other very well. The family knew me very well, you know, and there was that trust, and you know, and the father in particular, he would have done anything for me, you know. And when sometimes the going get rough, as they say, you reflect upon the good days, those days, and why are we married? Why are we together? It's because of that.
I wonder if you were going to talk about Dr. DeLay's
exactly
work,
where I
because
was
that's a
gonna go.
good,
That's
yes,
exactly where I was
that's
heading to
great.
next. I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
that's
Doc,
wonderful.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, so I do some research work with men around their relationships with their partners. Most of my work has been with men who are in relationships with women, but I can comment more broadly about men in relationships of intimacy, whether it be with other men or with women. Generally, folks come into relationships with a lot of hopes. They have a kindness that they want to share with another person, and so many relationships begin with all the best of intentions and a desire to be good. And sometimes life deals us some difficult circumstance, and people's reaction to those circumstances can play out in their closest relationship, in their intimate partnership. We know that men who can engage in violence and harm in their partnerships many will have witnessed that same behavior in their own families of upbringing. So they may have seen their caregivers engaging in some kind of physical arguments or physical fights and other sorts of harms, and just really the disrespectful treatment of one another. And so some folks will think of it as a learned behavior, that some men will engage that way. Other men might be less inclined to solve problems that arise, conflicts that arise through violence, but certain situations create disinhibition. So they might be, maybe they're using alcohol, or maybe their partner is using alcohol and it's upsetting for them. And in the moments, either their partner's use or their own use disinhibits what might be a normal control of their behavior. And you know, because in our relationships with our partner, we're usually close when we're having conflict, impulsive behaviors will sometimes come to the surface, where somebody is striking the other or pushing back or asking the other to get out of the way. And because when we're arguing and we're intensely upset with the other, we're sometimes too close for comfort. And we don't always respect others. So some of my work has been to research what happens for men in those moments. My new work is we're going to start to look at how men report their experiences of having intimate partner violence. We know that men are also victims of intimate partner violence, and perhaps not in the same numbers that we would see as women being victimized by their male partners. But just the same, there is this experience that's broad across the society. And we're interested in this new study to look at how men talk about the experience of whether they've been violent or been subjects of violence. And part of our interest is because in male and female relationships, there's a characterization of the violence that happens for most. It is what's referred to as common couple violence or situational violence. So it might be limited to a minor push or a shove or something like that. Men tend to not feel threatened by those experiences, so it doesn't register as something that was really harmful to them, differently than perhaps women do. And that's something to be said about the different sort of threats we represent to one another. But when men talk about their experience of having used violence, they might begin by talking about the experience of the violence that was used against them. That often gets dismissed. And so men will have these experiences of, well, it's okay for me to not do, or you want me to not do this, but you don't tell her to not do that. And it becomes that sort of a stance that they'll take will become a barrier to them moving toward an acceptance of sort of eliminating violence in their relationship. It's a barrier for the therapeutic person.
Yeah, so what I have been told by my spouse, I mean, I'm the woman here in the midst, so I guess I'll just say a couple of quick things that he has indicated over and over again. He says that picking your partner has got to be one of the most important things you'll ever do in your lifetime. So people have to be very, very careful about who they actually settle down with. And it sounds to me that you're all very responsible men, and it sounds like you've also picked really well and chosen really well. And I really wish for the success of your continuing relationships. Sounds very positive, very hopeful. And what do you have some sort of impressions that you've found, Tobias?
I have more questions than I have answers now. I think I want to sit down with Dr. David and just ask questions, and the information that I've received from both of you is priceless. So as a bachelor, I've definitely now gotten to get more of the advantages towards getting married than doing the old blah kind of life of living day by day. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your stories. I appreciate it.
And thank you for co-hosting with me. It's been a pleasure having you here on this side of the camera, as opposed to floor directing and then later editing. But it's really been a pleasure, and we'd really like to encourage our viewers at home to visit our website, and also check out the other websites too. Dr. DeLay is at the University of Manitoba, Faculty of Social Work. So you can certainly pick up on finding out more about his research and his work and networking with other organizations. So thank you.